Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. No matter where you are, we are in the studio with the very amazing and so inspiring Alana Karen. A little tidbit. We actually started this journey with Alana. She is really the fusion agent that brought Igor and me together to even think and conceptualize this podcast. And then she actually kicked off the show as our first guest. And I couldn't be more happy to share that Alana is going to be wrapping up this season with us. This is our 12th episode. We have been through 12 amazing journeys, interviewing, 11 amazing women and coming back to Alana because a lot has changed, as she will talk about on the show as well. Since we last chatted, tech is a whole new world, and hence the real women in tech also need to step in, step up, and look at it from a very different lens. Alana, welcome to the studio. I have an official intro for you, which I'll go into, but so glad to have you in the studio today.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be back with all of you. It's amazing to see what you've done.
I would say the same to you. You have a ton of things that are going on in your life. Alana is an award-winning tech leader, longtime Googler, 23, 24 years, I think, Google Director for Search Platforms, and the author of The Adventures of Women in Tech. She's a history major turned technologist and has spent 23 years building products billions of people use. And she's back with a timely new edition, Navigating the Hard Tech Era. Thrilled about the book. Thank you for writing it. High time we get more honesty on this topic. I just can't wait to go into all those provocative themes that we should be discussing, but we are just shy about. We'll dig into topics of trust, return to office, layoffs, some practical career playbooks, and how to decide whether to stay, switch, or step out of tech without losing your edge. Alana, thanks again for joining.
Thank you for having me. That intro, I might need to take. I feel like it has better words than how I describe myself. So thank you.
We'll start with how you start the book. It's something which resonated very deeply with me. And I'll quote it. Principles only mean something if you stick by them when it is inconvenient. Tell us about why did you choose to start your book with this, and what does this really mean to you?
Yeah, this is an old movie quote. It's from The Contender, which is 20 years old at this point. The entire story is about the president nominating for a major role and the process of trying to get a woman put into that position and the witch hunt that pursues about a particular event in her past, one that she refuses to talk about. And it becomes a real focus point for the opposition to her, political opposition to her. And regardless of what happens, even when witnesses would come forward and offer to talk about it, she sticks to her guns and says, I won't talk about it because it's not relevant. It is not what should be focused, and it wouldn't be for a man. Jeff Bridges, the president in this movie, ends up making quite a stirring speech to Congress demanding they approve her nomination. Anyway, I think that I thought of this when I was thinking about the changes in tech, because a lot of what people are mourning right now, if they've been familiar with the industry, is this feeling of principles lost, of what had initially been stated by both the companies themselves, but also individuals involved as their values, their mores, what they would stand up for, how they were building their company, how they were treating their people. And you fast forward now where 5 major companies have most of the profit of the NASDAQ in their pocket. And we're seeing a very capitalistic response to various elements of the business world, including AI, but also a downturn in other respects. I think there's just been a huge mourning, and a mourning of a seeming loss of principles. So very long explanation, but it seemed very, very fitting to me.
I love it. I love it. It's simply said, follow your convictions, even when it is not convenient, and it's something to live by. You call this the hard tech era. I found the title very provocative because it's we're all feeling it. It's that hard feeling in our hearts when we think about the era that was and the era that is. But you just labeled it. And thank you for doing that, because it takes a lot of courage. And we know you have no lack of courage. We've seen it over and over again. Tell us a little bit about the hard tech era for those who might still be wondering, what is this? Why is it hard?
I have to admit, I can't take credit for it. It's been popular. It may have come from other places, but it was popularized by a New York Times writer who wrote an article about this. And as I was trying to figure out what to name the book, it seemed really fitting for not just what's happening technologically, but also how people are feeling, like you said. So technologically, it really refers to this focus on behind the scenes capabilities of machines, both from respects of AI and server investment, but also the capabilities of things like cybersecurity that are enabled. So like a real, like back to like silicon, like what are we doing and like what is capable of this technology? So, in some ways, everything's hard versus soft right now. Soft might have been social media, right? Like soft might have been gaming. Like that's all on the UI layer in a way, right? And so this is the hard tech era. From a company and employee perspective, it also refers to the buckling down of really thinking about the tech industry, as a capitalistic endeavor, where the main purpose of these companies is not to give you a great experience as an employee. It is fundamentally to make money and abrupt turn there, where all this talk about culture, all this focus on manager development and well-being and flexible working arrangements and gone. Get back in the office, work, work, work. In fact, we're going to change your performance management systems to review you even further because we think you've all been lollygagging. So a very interesting turn and a real disrespect, honestly, right now of soft skills. So lots of stuff going on right now that makes it hard and seems like a really fitting name for what people are feeling if they're involved in the industry, even though no one would have said it was easy before.
That's true. And that's why I was very much looking forward to our conversation today, because when we last talked, you had written a book about belonging in tech and raising the confidence of everyday women to say, you belong here. And here are stories of 80 plus other women who felt like you, who breathe like you, who have challenges like you. And this is how they made it. This is how they're solving these problems. And your new book is taking that conversation further and saying, well, you belong, but it's going to be harder going forward on how things are. And you're reminding us that the choice is yours. And it's
Absolutely.
beautiful. Yeah. Tell us more about what motivated you to write the second book.
Well, for full transparency, I left Google last November, and it was very much a personal journey for me after 23 years at a company of figuring out what I still needed in my career, where I wanted to go, and very separate from my company, which had been for many years my be all and end all. And it had benefited from that, where I was fully invested, fully focused. I mean, obviously, I went ahead and had a family during this journey. And that said, I just did the woman thing and just added on without really reducing how I performed. And I think that as I came out and thought I need to write chapters about how this has all changed, very embedded in that was what I was seeing for myself and other people, which was figuring out whether this new version of tech really works for them. And it was happening semi-gradually, semi-abruptly, right? So I think over the years, there had already been a slow cultural transformation that I write about and a focus shift towards capitalism, especially as many of these companies went public and had to cater to stakeholders, not just users and employees. But then there was also a very abrupt shift post-COVID when user numbers dropped and companies scrambled to figure out both how to deal with that revenue loss with the number of employees they had and invest in AI, which was an imperative existentially to them to be part of this AI battle, this AI race. So to me, it started to be less about you belong in tech and way more about do you still want it? How are you feeling? How are you thinking about these changes? How are you accepting them? Because I saw a lot of people just in the early stages of change acceptance, shock, arguing, fighting back, a system that they weren't going to be able to change, and just really stuck in anywhere from rage to apathy versus really figuring out how it impacted them and what they were going to do. So the 3 chapters basically take you through explaining, from my perspective, what happened in the industry and then how it impacts you and what you can do different. Absolutely. I mean, I think some people were awake all along if they'd been raised with any sort of skepticism or previous corporate experience. But a lot of people came in like with this the majority of their corporate experience truly believing and drinking the Kool-Aid like we would always say. And for example, at Google, when the first big round of layoffs happened and people were immediately shut out of the system, and that was it. And it happened to even extremely tenured people. That was a major breaking point. And I saw it replicated at other companies. Google didn't stand alone in that regard. And you really still find people years later really trying to synthesize that, like the cognitive dissonance between what they thought and who they thought they were working for and what they thought they were doing and their value and contribution abruptly shifted in that moment.
Alana, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the shifts that you noticed that happened in the industry if we take a broader look at the industry, because I think you're in a very unique position. You study the tech market and you have a very unique voice and you have a unique view of what is happening in the market, and you also had the chance to be a participant of all those changes, and you started out 23 years ago. Can you tell us a little bit about what was it like 23 years ago emotionally, what it felt like, what was the general vibe, and how it changed during those 23 years?
So I suppose one must remember I was 23 years younger as well. But the vibe back then was very young, upstart, nerdy, because it really was a bunch of 20-year-olds who weren't following the traditional path of their elders. They were branching out and doing something completely different with something that mostly their elders didn't understand at all and weren't really part of. And it was like, it wasn't banking, it wasn't being a doctor, it was ununderstandable to most people. When I went into my college counselor and said I was spending a lot of time on web development in college, and this was back in the 90s, and I thought I was going to go do some kind of job in that space, he was like, "Why would you waste your time on that? You're a smart girl." So it really was just totally different. Like a pocket, ununderstood, nerdy pocket where the geeks were just running around doing things. And it took a while for the rest of the world to catch up. And in that period of time, you really got to make this world for yourself, pros and cons on that. But you really got to dictate the terms of that world for yourself, because for a period of time, there really wasn't that much influence from the external world. That changed over the times as the power and influence of these companies grew and the pace of understanding of their impact on the world grew. And you saw more legislation, more consumer speculation, more consumer groups rise, and across countries. So not just US, but globally, you saw that level of understanding and that level of scrutiny rise. But at the same time, it was because these companies were taking up more space and touching other industries and starting to have way more impact than just like one website. And you get to the 20s and all of a sudden it becomes very obvious how much power these companies have. I think in part because during COVID, they made 60% increase in revenues, right? Like they made so much money. There was nothing else to do. You stayed at home and you used the internet. And it became like much more obvious the power that these companies have, the amount of data these companies have. Already there had been speculation, don't get me wrong, but I think that the COVID period really brought to light an even broader understanding of that. And also because teens were so impacted by COVID, and I actually don't talk about this so much in the book. You're getting a little extra because I like you.
You're planting seeds for the next.
Yeah, maybe I'm planting seeds for the next one. I think too, there was maybe a broader understanding to their parents how much the next generation was being impacted. And they were impacted even more because they lost the socialization of those, that year-ish of being inside the house without being able to play with friends, go outside, et cetera, et cetera. And then abruptly, they start to do the layoffs. They go into this AI race. Everyone's scared about AI. We could talk about that more. Very different, right? Like from nerdy mecca to like capitalist monster, essentially. Also, everybody got older,
Right.
everybody got older in tech. It's not that you don't have a lot of junior people. You absolutely do. But when I started, probably like 90% of us were in our 20s. And by the time you fast forward, probably 20% were, and everyone else was, senior, tenured in some respect. That doesn't necessarily, I think a lot of people associate that with a slowdown. I don't think that was true across the board. It wasn't necessarily that adults slowed things down, but um, it is a very different feel. And also, what you got was sort of just like the superiority of that. People with 10, 15, 20, 25 years under the belt, very confident in what they were doing, for better or worse.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about trust, and I would even call it disappointment. So we discussed it with you a lot of times, and we see two big trends. One trend is a lot of people leaving tech in general, or leaving big tech for smaller tech or for startups. And I think each of us, when we go to our LinkedIn feed almost every day, you see a new post with like hundreds of likes. Somebody is leaving tech and doing something of their own or going to startups. On the other side, there is another trend. A lot of people still want to get into tech and into big tech. And we know a lot of people who spent like years of their lives trying to get in tech. And there are a lot of people like actually preparing themselves to get into tech, and some of them succeed, some of them don't succeed. When we talk about trust and that feeling of maybe disappointment in a way, what are the areas where people seem to lose trust in tech or in big tech?
In the first book, I talk about what attracted, in almost like a very identical way, women to join tech. And I think this is true across gender lines. I just only interviewed women. It was things like a belief that we were changing the world for the better and people wanting to be part of it. It was things like being able to improve my career at the same time as I contribute to a company. Also, that it would pay well, and a sort of a silent thing about security we can talk a little bit about. But it's a little silent thing that was a secure field. Um, and that you would work with people that you vibed with. I think when you look across all of those areas, people started to lose faith over the years, and they kept hunting, right? Like they would switch teams to look for the opportunity. They would switch teams to look for the people that they would click with. They would change companies. They would go to startups. They would, like they would try. And we know people who got lucky and really vibed and clicked and grew exponentially and profited individually. I also know people who basically just wandered, who roamed by what they found. And some of that is about expectations versus reality. Some of it is truly that tech didn't always grow the best managers. There were a lot of teams created, reorged, destroyed. Like you could get in, think you had something good, then some VP decided they didn't like the project. Done. There were things that you might have loved that you were working on that then, as everything from interest rates to user rates to how your company was doing, abruptly shifted, and you either had to end it or move on. So there were so many things going on, but what I would generally say was for an employee, it was no longer what had been happening in sort of the 2010s was that it was like a pretty sure thing. You would get in, you would work on interesting things, and you would personally benefit. And you would work with some people you liked, and you would be able to brag to your friends about what you're working on because you would get to change the world. Now, was that always true? No. Sometimes you were knee deep in an ad system, but generally you got to say, I work for Google, and people would be like, ooh. And then over time, that wasn't as true. And the layoffs really damaged that feeling of all of those four things being true. Now, from a user and government perspective, I'll just quickly say I spend a bunch of time in the book on that in parallel to employees losing trust, and actually a little bit ahead of employees losing trust. Users and governments lost trust that tech truly had the interests of users and the world in mind, that they weren't just making profit making or very blind technology for technology's sake decisions. And you see that growing in pace over the course of thousands, 2010s, 2020s, as people's understanding of what these companies are doing and the company's reaches to do more increase, with particularly interesting notes around the political environment. And I think generally what's always a concern, things like child security, et cetera.
As you were talking about it, I was recollecting something I recently read. I've started following Patrick Copeland. He used to be at Google at some point. Alana, I don't know if he crossed paths with you
Yes.
at that time, but I've been following his writings on LinkedIn. He's posting the truths about workplace, and I think they are very much the truths about the workplace, unfiltered. You should add that. And I think the first or second post itself, he says, don't go against the grain. And the system that you are part of is trying to flow in a certain direction. If you're going to try to make the system flow in the other direction, you're going to find friction. You're creating friction, and you are seen as friction. So don't go against the grain. And when I read that, I couldn't get that line out of my mind for the next, I think, 48 to 72 hours, because my entire career was defined as somebody who you'd bring into a meeting because she goes against the grain. So very specifically,
Yes.
just my experience of tech was, you want me there because I'm going to show you the alternatives. I'm going to
Yeah.
bring out that distinction. And all of a sudden, that is seen as going against the grain. And maybe I will be penalized for that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? One thing that I realized over the years is that all kinds of people can belong in tech. You can have all kinds of different approaches, all kinds of different personalities, etc. But if you want to be generally successful, you probably want to be emblematic of the system, not a counterpoint. And we can be very angry about that. We can. We can push against that. We can argue with it. You could be the exception sometimes. And you could be like, oh, that's not true. Look at me. But if you look at the majority that survived and excelled in that system, they will have gone with the grain. They will have taken in what that system is. They will have consciously or unconsciously studied it, and they will replicate it. And you see that in sales groups. You see that in engineering groups. Those are the two largest groups typically in a company. And what you see there are armies, especially during something like an AI race. And you want replicated, trusted soldiers during a war. You don't want someone who's going to argue with you about where the border is or whether it's our job to do that. No, like you want someone executing against orders. And you can honestly see in companies right now, to some degree, them systematically getting rid of the people who don't follow orders, who don't replicate orders. And it's not that they don't accept creativity. It's creativity within the system's boundaries. Creativity which benefits the system, which fulfills the system, and which profits the system. And many people for years use tech companies as their personal playground. I believe in this project. I want to create this role for myself. I don't believe in this product, so I'm going to be a one-man preventer of it by sabotaging every meeting.
Yep. We've
For
all
better or
seen
worse. Again, some of this was unconscious, not totally conscious. But I think what you're seeing is a sort of systematic dismantling of that, of I'm the CEO, I'm the VP, get in line, for better or worse. And we could talk for hours about what's great about that, because there was some crazy crap when it didn't run like that. And we can talk about the cons. But it certainly is not as positive feeling to the average employee. And it certainly is not a world where maybe you would feel welcome to go against the grain.
And I also, as you were talking about, I was thinking, well, the 25-year-olds also turned 50. So, they learned not to go against the grain.
They learned
around that time.
strategically. They learned strategically. I think, Siobhan, what you probably are overlooking in your story is that you had the judgment to know when to go against the grain, and when the going against the grain was the thing the group needed to get to the better place. And when it was not. And I think that's to some degree, you learn that over time. But I think also it's natural or it's not, right? You are a little bit more sensitive to EQ, to how to read the room, to when to bring up an idea and when to keep it in your pocket. And I think you and I both know, like, that's not generally a broad skill set in tech. Like, it's a lot of people who understand machines more than people. And so that's a rare skill set, which you have. I think you could probably continue to go against the grain. You are established and you have that skill set.
We'll see how much that comes to. I want to pivot us into our next segment. I've been reading this anecdote from the University of Virginia's Women in Data Science conference that you were at, where you mentioned something about feedback is a gift, but sometimes it's like the socks you didn't want from your grandmother. And I, I just loved it. It's a very classic Alana quote. I'm going to use it so much. Tell us more about this one.
I think that people have such an interesting reaction to feedback. Usually, unfortunately, the reason why this whole feedback is a gift thing comes up is because we sort of have to reset our brains. For whatever reason, feedback feels like an attack. And so often if you're giving feedback to an employee or you're receiving feedback, you will feel a flight, fright, freeze. And so you see a lot of people fight back against the feedback. They freeze or they sort of like run away and want to get away from it. Right. Sometimes you'll have people fight you right away. Sometimes they'll freeze. Then they'll come back later and be like, I didn't understand it. What I was really trying to say there was if we can view feedback as a gift versus a punch, you get to decide what you do with that gift, right? Instead of having sort of like your unconscious brain parse it and view it as an attack and you fight against it or, you apply all these negative connotations to it. If we can truly view it as a gift, then you can start to look at it as a gift you either want or you don't want. In like a much more conscious, I guess I would say less emotional way, in a way, like at least not an unconscious, immediate pushing it away or getting angry at it.
Yeah.
Conscious, well, what do I do with this? Or what do I not? Or do I just put it in the giveaway pile and never think about it again? Right? Like it to me, over the years, I had to, and I have an exercise in my workbook, the Adventures of Tech workbook about this. Like, I had to really start to think about, like, well, what is this? And where is it coming from? And have other people said this? And how do I parse this? And what do I take a bit from it? Or do I take it on wholeheartedly? What does it mean for the moment? And view it skeptically, but critically, instead of just in a real emotional, oh, I suck way. So that's what that meant. And I think if any of us have ever gotten a gift we didn't want, you kind of know that, like, thanks. And then you figure out what you're going to do with it later. I just kind of want us to all treat feedback like that.
I wanted to talk a little bit about emotional reactions. And because I've been following you for such a long time and we had a lot of conversation, and I actually read only 2 blogs, and one of those 2 is yours. And we will definitely leave the link in the notes for people to follow your Substack. One of the interesting things you shared in one of your blog posts is comparing relationship with a company and the end of those relationship was a breakup. And I think it's a great comparison because in some way, when we break up with an actual person, if those relationships are long enough, a part of ourself dies in that breakup. And maybe it can be true to break up with a company. And because now so many people are going through those breakups with different companies, I think it's safe to say that tens of thousands of people are going through those breakups, and potentially that trend will probably go on for some years. How can people actually move through that phase and not let it all hold them back?
I really like my bad boyfriend metaphor, although you can make it bad partner or whatever you do, because I think that sometimes we underappreciate how much our company is a relationship to us and one that we spent a lot of time invested in. And perhaps we believed they did too, or we felt through their actions or through our manager's actions that it was reciprocal. When that is removed, either through a layoff or a manager change happens and you no longer feel that love, that respect, that value that you were getting from them previously, it's a breakup. And I think that sometimes we just, especially with things like this, we rush people to get over it, right? Like, take the weekend, mourn, then on Monday, get your resume together, get back out there. And what I'm finding with people, especially if they were abruptly dumped with no warning, their company, right? Like they just were humming along, layoff, no closure, just done, is that it is taking them a long time to get over that. And you see this with people who were dating someone or in a long term relationship with them and the person abruptly breaks up with them as well. It is very hard to get over that because it came from nowhere. And you spend a long time questioning yourself, your decisions, your trust, your faith, questioning yourself because it led to that moment. And whether it was abrupt or not, I'm seeing a lot of people sort of have to mourn and get over questioning themselves and like regain trust in themselves, all these kinds of things. To get to the meat of your question, which is what can we do about it? I really do want people to think about this as something to cognitively get over, right? Don't bury it. Have a week or two where you're down in the dumps, where you're like calling your friends over and talking trash about the company and eating ice cream and like more, like in a safe way where you don't go on the internet and publicly badmouth anybody because that's not
Mhm.
a good look long term. But like in a safe way with friends, with trusted colleagues, whatever, you get through the first phase of the change curve, which is basically disbelief and anger. It might take longer than 2 weeks. It does for some people. But what I would say is if it's taking you more than a couple months, I do really recommend talk therapy because I think that sometimes these things trigger other things in people where they abandoned by other things in life. And it is really hard to move on and move on healthfully if that happens. But in any case, you take a little bit of time, be down in the dumps. And then you're going to get an apathy. Apathy. There's a trough of apathy, of despair. Allow yourself to wallow. Again, a week, a couple. Some people go through all of this in hours. Other people, it takes weeks. So there's variation on the change curve. But if again, you're stuck in apathy for more than I would say a month, I would start talking to someone. Once you get through those, you're going to start to feel optimism again. You're going to start to feel hope. You're going to start feeling energy to work on your resume, to get your name out there. Whole lot of interesting things in a competitive hiring environment about how you do that and how you best present yourself. Rely on colleagues, reach out to help from people like Igor, who's a lovely coach, and you'll be on your way. It can take a while though, is all I'm going to say, to get through the change curve, but then also to find a new job. And there will be days where you feel bummed again. But if you find yourself continuing to plunge back into anger and despair, again, I would find someone to talk to. There's lots of sources for free or discount therapy if money is an issue. A lot of coaches will offer free sessions as well. So find some trusted people to talk to and do not isolate yourself.
That's a beautiful vision, and I just wanted to ask one follow-up question. So the situation that we just discussed, it seems like the news about layoff are caughing those people off guard, like they were not expecting it. But because so many layoffs are happening right now, do you feel like it might make sense to be kind of always layoff ready and be always in that kind of ready mode, have your resume updated, be a little bit more visible on LinkedIn, build your network, look around to stay relevant in the market? Do you feel like now employees of those tech companies have to be a little bit more active and kind of always expect that blow to the gut?
I mean, yes and no. I think what you're saying is good wisdom. Always have a plan B. There were a lot of people who didn't have a copy of their resume off a corporate machine.
Yeah.
And then corporate access got locked down. So absolutely do a regular updating of at least the resources that you have so you could craft your resume, right? Your latest performance review, a copy of your latest paycheck, some of the basic stuff. Have a little go bag that is on a personal device that you have. It doesn't mean you have to always keep your resume updated because you'll have a little time to get that together, but have the plan B that you would know. I think also have the plan B in terms of key things you need, like X month's dollars in savings. If not that, what would you do if you couldn't make rent? Where would you go? If you have a visa, what would you do? Right? Have a little bit of at least cognitive backing. So if the worst thing were to happen, you wouldn't have to fit, like you have the script for yourself of what you would do short term and what you would do short term to regain your footing so you could look long term. I think it is always useful, and we're seeing a big difference between people who have a network and people who don't in terms of finding a job right now, because there are hundreds of resumes hitting every open position, and you have a lot better of a chance of getting looked at if you've got someone you know in the company who can forward your resume to the recruiter or the hiring manager or a referral in the system. So to the degree you can continue to take some time on the evenings, weekends, lunch dates, whatever works for you, to keep your network ties strong, to continue to make some new network ties, I do highly recommend it. Why I said yes and no, I'll just say in brief, is that I do think it's really hard to live every day as if the axe could hit that day. It devalues every single action, and you question every single, like, should I even bother? What's the point of finishing this project if they could fire me tomorrow? It's not a great long-term brain space to stay. And I think we are seeing it actually really hurt people in tech emotionally, but also if you think about teams, like to motivate a team that thinks they might get fired tomorrow. So to the degree you can kind of re-engage in your project, and if you really don't believe, yes, like even while you're doing some work so that you don't get performance managed out, you do start to look in parallel. If you really think it's a project that is going to get cut, then maybe you do want to do more. But I think a lot of people are just, especially high performers. I see high performers all the time because high performers tend to also be high anxiety. It's the high performers who are like, they'll cut me tomorrow. And I have to keep being like, no, they won't. They really won't. I was recently talking to an ABP, my old ABP. She was the best ABP I've ever worked with. She constantly thinks she's going to get fired. I'm like, honey bunch, they're not going to fire you. I feel like you have no idea how you were legions better than a lot of your colleagues. They'll re-slot you if something changes. So I think a little bit of that is going on. And so I say yes and no because I think people sometimes use it to constantly stay on edge about their day job. I'm not sure that's helpful.
No, I'm not very proud of this, but I'm going to say it because it's going to make people realize what that anxiety looks like, the real world example of that. I knew it was time for me to get out of the environment I was in when I started to keep a list of people I knew should, not would, should be fired before me. I did. I knew. I was like,
hit list. Siobhan had a hit list.
I had a hit list. So
what was your idea? Were you going to, if they tried to fire you, hand them the list?
No, it was my way of telling myself that I will not be on the list because if they come to, before they get to me, there is a list above me that should first be looked at.
Yes.
Before somebody comes and questions if I'm being valuable to the company or not.
Yes.
And I knew that was so toxic that I did not want to be doing that every single week or month, or look at my colleagues that I was probably going for lunch with or seeing them in the hallway and think if they were on my list. And that is just, while I'm probably the only one who is saying it, but that is a reality of many tech workers today, where the survival instinct is showing up in every single interaction. It is showing up in every single document they're writing. It is showing up in together because that instinct, it's primal instinct. It's me before others.
And I touch on this in the book. One of the things that's so hard about this is that it triggered everyone's fight, flight, freeze. So you've got all these people fighting because they're scared. And you've seen the politics reach a fever pitch. Because now it's not just about power, it's about survival, right? And so you actually, Siobhan, were lovely because you didn't take that list and activate it. But I've seen people activate it, right? I've seen people be like, "Oh, don't look over here. Look at that team. Don't look over here. Look at that team." And I've been the victim of it because here I am just doing the right thing, heads down, delivering, delivering, delivering. And meanwhile, other teams are out there politicking, spending a large percentage of their time on politics versus action. That is a huge battle for tech right now, to get refocused on doing good things and not on these internal dynamics.
The wonderful dark corners of tech that Alana's conversations take us to, because you should go there and enlighten yourself. So thank you for taking the conversation there. All right. Well, it will be a miss if we don't talk about the AI. We haven't really touched upon it. Quickly, I loved something you said the other day. You were saying you do upgrade your complexity in the world of AI. You're not irrelevant. It's not coming to take your jobs. I fully agree with all of it, by the way. I think there's just so much paranoia and around how AI is going to take away our jobs.
We're knee deep in the world, and we know what it is and what it isn't. And we know the time frames, and we know what it's like to work with engineers and actually like get things done. And we know, I think, a little bit more about so far what AI is capable of and how much work it takes to get it to the point of that capability. And I think what the general public is seeing is the best demo or the best feature that has been hyper trained behind the scenes to the point of not AGI, hyper trained behind the scenes. Like, this thing isn't, it may appear aware and capable, but behind the scenes, you've got people all the way down to vendor armies helping this thing with factuality, with proper tone, sustaining the conversation. So like having sort of memory and statefulness, with grammar, syntax, with length. I mean, like with both explicit directions and implicit directions. Like, what would be the explicit thing a human would know to answer versus what would just a human know is implied in this? That you would list bullets, that you would list this fact about the Civil War, right? Because it's such a key fact. You don't really sometimes know a key fact from a non-key fact because you've got the whole internet, right? And so it's sometimes hard for you to tell. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, like, I hear the people who are talking big and I use the stuff and it's still not great. It's very good at the math and science of something, although you trained it to know 2 + 2 = 4. It didn't independently know that. But it's very good at things where you can put it into rows, into columns, where you can summarize it, where the facts are there, and it's great. It is still quite difficult to get creation right. And I think we see that with a lot of the instantiations of imagery and videos, etc. While people are oohing and eyeing about what it can do, it often gets it wrong still. And if you're thinking about the true replacement factor of humans, it can't get it wrong so much. So that's why I focus on complexity. It will increasingly get basic tasks, making a spreadsheet, basic summarization, basic creation, increasingly correct. And so if your job was essentially removing backgrounds from images, you've been replaced. If your job was making basic spreadsheets and doing basic computations, yes, you'll be replaced. But it will be both increasingly difficult, but also increasingly expensive for it to do complex things. And so the more complex, the more beyond those use cases, the more niche you get, the longer or less likely it will be for AI to follow you, because it is still quite expensive to get these machines and to do all the training. And they're not going to follow all the niche use cases. The money just won't be there. So increase your complexity, increase the level of human judgment you have to apply, because it is still very hard, even though they want to use this up the wazoo to replace customer support. It is still very hard to replicate the kind of trust and live adaptation that people do to support people versus a computer will do off of its training. And the training won't be good if you fire all the customer support people or you get it up and running. Just to be clear, You actually need some of the people who know things to train it and to continue to update it. Okay, anyway, we're going deep here. It's not going to be that good. And the companies are making mistakes. So not only am I pretty sure it's going to take a little while because of the technology, I'm also pretty confident because the CEOs are just making mistakes. If they really wanted agentic support to work, they would keep far more of their CS team to train it than they are. And lastly, I would say robots are going to take a while. They will first be for very specialized procedures where the environment is self contained and managed. I think what is positive is that I do think the advent of AI may re-spark a a fire that had started to extinguish a bit around entrepreneurship. And because what had happened sort of over time is that there had been these big companies that grew over the 2010s. They were very big, and maybe you all go to them. And the big companies, because they have to deliver year over year, quarter over quarter earnings, the use cases they fund will often majoritively be capitalistic, meaning they make money. They make money. And money making use cases are not always what solves world's problems because there are just more lucrative, easy ways to make money through human behavior, through enterprise use cases, enterprise to enterprise, where you're just improving a workflow or selling a new product to the enterprise. You're not really solving world hunger, right? Perhaps you tell yourself a story that providing that product, you somehow, but it's very like steps away. Um, and I do think that AI in the hands of employees could spark both initiative that applies to the company. It also might, over in time, encourage people to step out of those companies and start their own thing. Because, first of all, this technology is so interesting. It may spark ideas that they didn't have before. It also may empower them to do things that they weren't personally capable before, right? They knew basic coding, but they didn't know everything. And now they can use vibe coding and Replit and some of these other new softwares emerging to do a prototype at a low cost to get themselves off the ground before they have to hire engineers. Maybe it gives them capabilities to market and self market that they didn't have before. People who are not English as a first language or wherever they are, the language isn't their first language, now have the capabilities to improve that they didn't have before and up level in a way that before that was a barrier. I had a blind colleague write about the ways that weren't even necessarily the primary use case of AI, but were in fact really helping them because of these capabilities of AI. And I think a lot of us have seen how AI will just summarize things for you. And previous places where people, for instance, wouldn't add image tags and blind people couldn't get those, like didn't know what an image was. Now AI is doing a lot of that. And so we're up leveling a bunch of things at the same time that everyone's afraid. There's an enormous potential that's happening here. There's also an enormous potential for AI to be able to look at data and see things that humans can't. These, if this is a little bit of an if, because we have to make sure these cases are funded. If we do direct AI towards those use cases, we could potentially solve hunger, environment issues, understanding what chemicals are triggering certain things in the human body, because now it can look over this data set that previously would have taken researchers years to do manually in far less time. So much good, so much good. So I would say generally that whilst I think that this era in tech companies has perhaps made employees feel more like going home and playing video games than redirecting it back into the company, because like you're not going to get promoted, you're going to get performance managed harder, and you might get laid off. I do think that there's also this like spark that I hope a lot of people are feeling and starting to take agent for themselves. Because to me, this reminds me a little bit of back when I was in college and I could start to teach myself web design through information that had never been available before and through tools that hadn't been available before. And I made a whole career out of it.
Mhm.
Kind of hoping, I'm hoping.
Yeah. Alana, we want to get people excited about the book. So you have a lot of good stuff in the new edition. You have new chapters, you have a workbook, you have an updated chapter on tools. And in general, you described the new chapters of the book as group therapy for people going through the changes in the tech industry. Tell us a little bit about how it works in practice.
The original book, Ashbam, so clearly described earlier, had 3 parts and really focused on belonging and stories so that by the time you were done with the book, you would feel like, yes, it was hard, but you could do it. And here's how you could get support and help on your journey. Now I've added a 4th part, and it's right up front. New preface describing why I've done this, a little bit of a guide to reading the book. And I wanted in that new part to really do this group therapy of this era and be like, okay, this is what happens. This is what's been happening. This is why you see all the CEOs doing this stuff. And then this is what happened with trust. So it also really helps you understand that emotionally. That's the 2nd chapter. And then the 3rd part is very much like, all right, guys, or the 3rd chapter of that first part is basically like, okay, what do you want to do? Those 3 chapters, by the way, do highlight places where women and minorities have struggled more, but they are otherwise pretty genderless in a way. So I really do invite all kinds of types to look at them and read them. And then I just did a little bit of updating elsewhere where I could integrate workbook content, which had happened after, add book club questions and workbook content at the end, but just really support people more on their journey. I think it's going to be great. I hope so. I hope it's really great for the time. I am, when I launch the ebook in November, going to run a good chunk where the ebook is free. So if you want more info on that, you're going to want to follow me on LinkedIn or sign up for my Substack newsletter.
Fantastic. We'll be sure to add it to the show notes as well. I'm looking forward to reading the entire book again. I don't know if I've shared this with you, Alana, but there were times when I had bookmarked some chapters and I've gone back and reread your first book too. So there's a lot of honest goodness.
It's really good. There's like little nuggets. Like there's a whole chapter on likability. There's a whole chapter on women supporting women. Like there's just such good stuff from the first book too, in the 2nd through 4th part of the book.
Well, in general, end of the year for me, for sure, and I know several professionals, it's a time of reflection of the year that has been, and it really, you do ask yourself those questions. Am I living to my values? I think you mentioned it somewhere, right? It's like, am I having fun? Do I like what I'm doing? Do I like the people I work with? Am I still learning? And if any of those questions are answered to be, if there's a doubt or an ambiguity in any of it, then it's time for that reflection. And I think your book will enable a lot of people to open that.
It's a real time to revisit where you are.
Well, thank you. This was fantastic, as always. I hope we keep bringing you back. I hope you keep writing. I know you mentioned somewhere in our conversation that, I'm going to focus on Substack more. I think you still have a few books in your backpack.
Thank you so much for having me, for taking the time from your busy days. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.